can bring fun could sometimes bring terror. And the thing that I'm thinking of is a prank war where people are going back and forth pranking each other. And I think there are some people that are just inclined to like pranking and being pranked more than others. Personally, I started working at the church at our Woodway campus, and my boss just loved pranking people for no reason. And then a few years ago, I moved and spent some more time at our Cypress campus of our church, and lo and behold, my boss there loves to prank people. And I hate pranks. Now, I don't like them that much because I don't get as much joy out of doing it as pain from receiving it. But what is it that makes pranks work or fun? Prank war works and it's fun when the two parties are doing a relatively even tit-for-tat fun things for excitement and entertainment and creativity, right? That's the idea. There's supposed to be a law of proportional return back and forth between the pranks. But you may have experienced this before. If you then prank your friend who was the wrong friend, your friend that has that flash of crazy in their eye, you know that you've made a huge mistake because no longer are you participating within the law of proportional return. All of a sudden, you've pranked your friend that's going to ruin your life, right? The way that it's supposed to work is it's just a little bit escalated as time goes on. I had a buddy when I was in high school and then in college, and I found out very early in friendship, I could not playfully like shove him or hit him ever the way that guys often do. He would turn around and just shellac me, immediately. He just didn't understand. And so your crazy friend will do that in a prank war. You may start with something fun. You cover their car in Post-it notes, or maybe you put cellophane over the door so that they walk into it, rearrange their office furniture. The next thing you know, they've stolen your identity, forged a false identity on Facebook. They're catfishing you. They've taken your social security number and they've drained your bank account. You don't want to prank the wrong friend. And the reality is, a prank, logically, it really is you harming the other person, sort of. We do it in fun, but pranks taken to their logical conclusion is, I'm gonna burn your house down, right? And so your crazy friend, all they're doing is that they're taking a little idea of the prank and they're taking it all the way to its logical conclusion. And that's actually the one idea that I would like us to focus on tonight. And the title of what we're going to talk about is basically this: a little wrong goes a long way. A little wrong goes a long way, especially in the wrong direction. A little bit of wrong does not stay a little bit of wrong. It's like your crazy friend where their eyes flash and it takes it all the way to its logical conclusion where things get crazy. We're going to read verses 7 through 12 of Galatians chapter 5. What we're going to do at the beginning is we will read all of the verses, and then we will talk about them a little bit at a time. So starting in verse 7, Galatians chapter 5, it says this: "You were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? This persuasion did not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough. I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you will bear his judgment, whoever he is. But I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. I wish that those who were troubling you would even mutilate themselves." Okay, I know we're all thinking the same thing. Verse 12 is insane. So let's talk about that at the beginning, and then we will talk about everything else. Basically what's happening here, we've talked about this at length in the previous weeks. The controversy at hand for these believers in Galatia was a cultural and religious controversy specifically about circumcision, right? The early Christians sprung up from within the Jews. Jesus was Jewish, so were his disciples. So as such, all of them cared about the marks of the law that God had given to Israel, that God had given to them and told them to follow. And so when the Holy Spirit began to be given to these non-Jewish believers, the question then came up: how Jewish do the Gentile believers need to become in order to be a part of God's people? And Paul's answer to that is not at all, right? He says you do not have to be circumcised. You do not have to follow the food laws. You don't have to follow the calendar. It simply is faith in Jesus that makes you a believer. And so that was the controversy of the day. And because of that, the agitators that have come from Jerusalem, as from what Paul tells us earlier in the book, they cared about the physical marks of the sign of being God's people, which was circumcision. Now, at the same time, this is going to help explain verse 12 a little bit. There was a long history in the ancient world of people in worshiping pagan gods mutilating themselves physically. So one of the things that comes to mind is the story with Elijah and the prophets of Baal. Remember, Elijah challenges them to this thing and say, which one of our gods can burn up this offering on the altar? And one of the things that happens when the prophets of Baal do not see their offering being burned up is it says they start to mutilate themselves. They start to cut themselves and beg that the God would do the things he was going to do, and he didn't. And then Elijah started teasing them and said, maybe your God's using the bathroom. I was personally hurt by that, but that's what he says. And so that's one example of that. But an even more intense example of that, and by the way, this is slightly mature in topic here. I'm sorry to the children that are in the room, but there was a nearby god or goddess worshipped by many of the people in Galatia. The goddess's name was Cybele, I believe was her name. And one of the worship practices for this pagan goddess is that they were reenacting a thing that apparently happened in the past where priests or devout devotees of this goddess would work themselves up into a stupor or a trance and actually castrate themselves. That's something that was nearby in Galatia. All of the Galatian believers would have known this. So, what's happening in verse 12? Is Paul just being crude? I would say no. Paul's using essentially sarcasm here to say to everyone listening, he said, the only thing that matters is faith in Christ. If they are so concerned with where the right cuts happen, I just wish they'd cut the whole thing off, is essentially what Paul says. So now that we've covered that, let's go to the rest of the passage, now that we've gone over that spicy part of the text. But let's talk about a few things. The first one is this. Paul uses a bunch of different metaphors in just these few verses. In the first one, he talks about the idea of running a race well. And so there's a few parts that Paul is concerned about, and he says that can happen to these Galatian believers that will get in the way of them walking with the Lord. And the first major concept is this one. It's that people can and will try to cut in on your race. Verse 7 said this, you were running well. Who hindered you from obeying the truth? There's a bunch of different places where Paul uses the metaphor of a race for following Jesus. The life of being a believer and walking with him, Paul often talks about as you are running a race in a way that you would hope you would win. And so he says, you were running well. Who cut in on you? And the idea here is that Paul is saying that people will often be the problem and will try to cut in on your obedience with the Lord. This should not be surprising to you. You know, if you think about a lot of the biggest difficulties or issues that have come in your life, they are usually because of people. People often get into the way. One of the pastors at our church will often say, it would be a really easy job to be a pastor if it weren't for the people, is what he says, which is true. People will cut in on your race. And this is especially true spiritually. People, for all sorts of reasons, will try and cause problems in you walking with the Lord. Now, it's not worth always psychoanalyzing why this is the case. I don't know all the reasons that the agitators had come into Galatia, had gone out of their way to go to this foreign place and say, you have to be circumcised in order to follow Jesus, but they did it. They actively were going in and trying to make these Galatian believers stumble. And that the next logical step here is to say, there will be people, for whatever reason, that will take actions in your life to try and keep you from walking with the Lord the way that you should. People will get in your way. And the next step to that is to say, we need to be very careful with who we allow to influence our walk with the Lord. You know, there are many people in the church that might come to you pretty confidently and tell you what you need to do. Should you always trust them? I don't know. Maybe not. You need to be very judicious about who you allow to pour into your life. There was a collegiate athlete named Louis Zamperini. He wrote a biography. He became a prisoner of war during World War II and has an amazing story. But when he was in college, he was one of the very best runners in the world. In fact, he might have been the very best. And so in one of the NCAA finals for running, the year, I think it was 1938, he was by far the favorite to win the race. And he was running. He was a long-distance runner. And apparently, according to his book, all of the coaches of the other teams basically told the runners, if you don't do something about this guy, he's going to win. And so the coaches of these other runners told him, you need to cut in on this guy's race. Literally, sharpen your spikes, gouge, gore him, elbow him, and that's what happened during the race. It got to the point where he was about to try and break out. One of the runners intentionally stepped on his foot with the spike, gored his foot. Another runner started putting his feet behind him, cutting up his shins. Another runner elbowed him in the ribs and broke some of his ribs in the middle of this race. The metaphor Paul's giving here is that if you're not careful, there are people who are going to step on your feet, elbow you in the ribs, try and get in the way of you walking with the Lord. And it just shows you need to be very careful about who you listen to, about what God expects from your life. There are all sorts of reasons that people might try and cut in on your race. And they might be a person who's deluded, thinking that they're helping you. I'm sure that's what was happening with these agitators coming into Galatia. But it could be because they are blinded by pride. It could be some sort of unresolved sin in their life that has led them. It could be just a lack of vision for what God is doing. It could even be that they just are theologically plain wrong, but are extremely confident in how wrong they are. I have a coworker, and I think it's so funny. There's been a few times where she's come in, and we will talk about competing about little stupid games and things or races in the office. And she has this intense, unwarranted confidence in herself in some of these things. She's wrong, and she is so excited about the fact that she's wrong, even though she thinks she's right. There are people that are like that. And all of that to say, you have to be very careful about who you allow to pour into your life. Your discipleship and walking with the Lord is not something that you can outsource to other people. You have to be judicious about how you do that, who you listen to. And I actually would say this, because people, sometimes not on purpose, might cut into your race, one of the key elements of being a mature believer is learning how to, when listening to people teach God's word or talk about things, it's called chewing on the meat and spitting out the bones when someone's talking. You know, there's no person who's going to be right about everything when they're teaching you. You have to develop that habit and ability to listen to what someone's saying and then discern which parts of these do I agree with, which parts do I not. Because if you're not careful, people will cut in on your race. The other thing that will happen is this. Bad ideas will try to cut in on your race. Verses 8 and 9, Paul says this, "This persuasion did not come from him who calls you. A little leaven leavens the whole lump of dough." So now, Paul uses a couple other metaphors about being persuaded and then about cooking or baking. Here's what he says. But he says that a little bit of leaven, when put into bread, it leavens the entire piece of dough. Now, there is a clear precedence in the Old Testament with Israel about leavened and unleavened bread. In some of their celebrations, the Lord basically tells them you can only eat unleavened bread. It's a metaphor for the fact that if you allow immorality among you, it will grow. It will infect the entire thing. And I will say the same thing is largely true with ideas. I made the comparison and the joke a minute ago about your crazy friend who gets involved in a prank war, and before you know it, your car's totaled. You know, they take things all the way to its logical conclusion. Ideas are the same way. If you're not careful, and if you make something a core idea in your life, that idea is going to work its way out through its logical conclusion in your life. And by the way, a lot of human history involves this. It involves an idea being introduced, and then that idea works itself out in human history to its logical conclusion. One of the big examples I would give of this, and without trying to get too deep or complicated, is that there was a philosopher named Hegel who had a thing called the Hegelian dialectic, where he basically said that history is going to work in a certain way. There is a thesis, an antithesis, and then finally a synthesis. And then people, as a result, started to make political philosophies out of this, namely Karl Marx viewed it this way. And a lot of what's happened in the last few hundred years, has been a working out of that idea over time. And this is worth thinking about for a moment, because as humans, we live in a cloud of culture that has certain ideas that are favorable at the moment, a spirit of the age that is there at all times. And we just have to be careful that a bad idea, there is definitely a hierarchy of how good or bad ideas are. Sometimes people will say in a meeting, there's no such thing as a bad question or a bad idea. That's dumb. There are definitely bad ideas, and there are definitely bad questions, and I'll tell you when you ask them. But you need to be very careful. Bad ideas, if you allow them to take root in your life, will fester and grow to the point where they will reach their logical conclusions. Bad ideas will work themselves out. And so Paul says it this way to them. This persuasion about circumcision, it did not come from Jesus. It came from somewhere else. It came from that cloud of unknowing, the spirit of the age that's going on among you. And he says, be careful, because a little bit of that will spoil the entire lump. A little bit of leaven leavens the entire dough. And so that's true in our lives as well. We have to be careful about what ideas take hold in our life. And by the way, I think one of the big parts of this, it's especially true that things that become core tenets or ideas of our life. One of the ways that we can avoid bad ideas taking hold in our heart and going too far is having the core idea, the core philosophy of our life, simply being that we need to know Jesus. We talked about this last week, that Jesus is the Logos behind the universe. What it means to be a believer is not to follow a moral system or to follow a code. It means to know a person. A person. Jesus in the flesh is God. He's the reason behind the universe. If he is your core idea, your core thing that you're following, it will protect you from sometimes the bad ideas working themselves out too far. I also think this means we should probably have a little bit of humility about our view of the world. Now, some of you may think you have an airtight, full view of what's going on in human history and politics and religion and sociology. Just be careful. I think it's worth having humility. There are much wiser people from you in the past that we can look at now and say they were really wrong about a few things. It might be true for you and I as well. So finally, if people will try and cut in on your race, and if bad ideas will cut in on your race, that means that the role of a leader should be to protect from these things. Here, I've had this idea of leadership in my mind for the last couple weeks, but here's what I would say. A leader should restrain bad ideas and protect against troublesome people. A leader in any place, especially in the church, that's largely what the leader's role is. We have to restrain against bad ideas, point people toward Jesus, and then also, sometimes, to protect against troublesome people. You might ask, well, what happens when the troublesome person is the leader? That's a great question. That's not a thing I can answer just yet, but we have to be careful. The leader's role is to do those things. Paul says this in verses 10 and 11. He says, I have confidence in you, in the Lord, that you will adopt no other view, but the one who is disturbing you will bear his judgment, whoever he is. But I, brethren, if I still preach circumcision, why am I still persecuted? Then the stumbling block of the cross has been abolished. Paul here is telling them, I'm behaving as a leader for you. I'm trying to protect you against an insidious idea that will cut short your race, and I'm trying to protect you from people who do not have your best interests in mind. So I think it actually is worth asking, when you examine the people that are leading you in your life, are they fulfilling those roles? Are they steering you away from bad ideas, protecting you from bad ideas? Are they protecting you from troublesome people? There's a passage that came to mind for me. I'm reading in the chronological Bible right now, and so I was reading in Exodus 32, and there's a story that illustrates this very well. It's when the Israelites have been freed from their slavery in Egypt. The Lord has done these incredible things, these 10 plagues he sends to the Egyptians. He finally parts a sea and closes it back up on the Egyptian army. And the time has come where the Lord has said, now that Israel, I have chosen you to be my people, this is how you're going to live. He's about to give them the law. At this point, he has already told them, I am the Lord your God, don't worship any other gods. He's told them that, that's about it. And Moses goes up the mountain to receive the law from the Lord. So in a little while, Moses was going to come down with the stone tablets with the law. And while he's gone up the mountain, he's gone a little bit longer than the Israelites expect him to be. And this is what happens. This is in Exodus 32, starting in verse 1. Now, when the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain, the people gathered together to Aaron. By the way, Aaron is Moses' brother. He was the other de facto leader of the Hebrews at this point. And they said to him, come, make us gods that shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So he was gone a little bit longer than they thought, and they said, he's gone. He's never coming back. It'd be like, if you go out for groceries, you leave your oldest child in charge, and the younger kids are like, they've been gone too long. They're never coming back. We're in charge now. Let's eat mac and cheese, something like that. Verse 2. So, and by the way, they told him, make us gods that we can worship and will go before us. So Aaron said to them, I would never do that. That's not what he says. He says, break off the golden earrings, which are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people broke off the golden earrings, which were in their ears, and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand, and he fashioned it with an engraving tool and made a molded calf. So Aaron says, okay, give me all the gold that you have. Mind you, this is gold that was given to the Israelites by the Egyptians because the Lord inspired them to do so. So basically, this is a gift from the Lord. They take the gold, pool it together, make it into a giant calf to worship. We're told afterward they basically participate in a pagan idolatrous worship service where they're singing and dancing and who knows what else around the golden calf. And by the way, this is just an editorial note from me. Hindsight's 20/20. But if you were going to make something to worship, like at least make it something cool, make it like a leopard or like a Lamborghini or something. Anyway, they made a calf and they're worshiping it. And so Aaron, we see, he tells them, bring this to me. He molds it using an engraving tool, makes it into a calf. Then we're told that up the mountain, the Lord tells Moses what happened, and Moses pleads with the Lord. He feels responsibility for the people, and he says, Lord, for your name's sake, don't wipe these people out. Please have mercy on them. Moses then comes down to the mountain, gets angry, smashes the tablets that are on the ground, the tablets that God had written the law on, and this is what happens, starting in verse 21. And Moses said to Aaron, what did this people do to you that you have brought so great a sin upon them? So he says to him, how could you let them do this, or how could you do this to them? You as a leader have failed in what you're supposed to do. So Aaron said, do not let your anger of my Lord become hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil. So Moses, a real leader, hears what's going on and takes responsibility for the people, even though he had nothing to do with it. He cares for them and says, please don't do this. Aaron, on the other hand, was completely participating in it and instead says, well, you know them. It reminds me a lot of Genesis chapter 3, where the Lord says to Adam, how could you have eaten from the fruit of this tree? And he says, well, the woman you gave me. And he was there the whole time, by the way. And so, very similar, and it continues, verse 23, Aaron says, for they said to me, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And I said to them, whoever has any gold, let them break it off. So they gave it to me, watch this closely, and I cast it into the fire, and this calf came out. Notice that's not what was said the first time around. He used the tool to engrave it. His response is he says, well, the people were set on evil, so I couldn't help it. I took the gold together, I put it into the fire, and this calf magically came out. No, he was the one who did it. And so basically what you see here is a tale of two leaders. You see one leader that takes responsibility for the people that now is confronting the troublesome person. You see another leader who goads the people into immorality and then blames them afterward and downplays his own responsibility. This is an example of what we're talking about, that the bad ideas that the Israelites had picked up from Egypt about pagan idolatry bled into their passion for what they were going to do. And Aaron, as a bad leader, cut in on what God wanted them to do by not restraining them. It actually says exactly that in verse 25. Now when Moses saw that the people were unrestrained, for Aaron had not restrained them, to their shame among their enemies. So Aaron's job was to restrain them, to protect them from bad ideas, and he did not do it. And I think this is worth us reflecting as far as leadership is concerned. Just a few questions that I want to put out there. The first one is this: who is leading you in your life right now? Sometimes the people that are in leadership over you are there because of a position. Maybe it's in work or something like that. But I guess the other way I would ask the question is, who are you allowing to lead you right now? Are you being led by a person who is steering you away from dangerous ideas or harmful ideas and steering you toward the beauty of the Lord? Or are they not? The next question I would ask is this: what ideas are you allowing to form your view of the world right now? Where is your discipleship coming from? It comes from whatever you're listening to. It comes from whatever you're reading. It comes from whatever you're thinking about. That's where those things come from. So who are you allowing to lead you? What kind of ideas are you allowing to permeate your mind? And then the final question that I would ask is this: in whatever leadership that God has given you in your life, in your family or in the people that are around you or in your work, what kind of leader are you? Are you protecting people from ideas that are going to hurt them, or speaking truthfully about things that are true or things that will be harmful? Are you protecting the people that are in your care from troublesome people? Or are you the troublesome person? I mean, those are all questions that are worth asking. God has given you leadership in some sphere of your life. It's either your family or your friends, anyone that you have any influence over. The Lord has given you leadership in that place. And are you behaving in a way, are you leading in a way that is honoring what the Lord has called you to do? Paul gives us a good model of it here. He is trying to steer them toward the beauty of Christ, away from insidious ideas that will cut in on their race. And when necessary, he's confronting the troublesome people that are trying to hurt the people that he loves. Is that the kind of leader that you are? Or do you steer away from confrontation too much? Or are you sometimes not watchful about the ideas that are going on with the people that are under your care? I think those are all things worth asking. Paul was passionate about the believers in Galatia not being steered off course, but remembering what is true and beautiful and what was required of them, which was to know Jesus. The question is, are you and I doing the same thing? Who is leading us? Are you allowing the correct people to lead you? And how are you leading the people that are in your care? Only you can answer that question, but it's something that the Lord requires of you and of me.